Inclusive. I've heard the word for quite a number of years in my career, but it's one thing to gun for if we're going to deliver good governance as we want, because sometimes if you're not in a particular shoe, you may not know how it feels within it. That's why the women were calling for inclusive governance. Young people also visited the president and called for inclusive governance. Now, this, in terms of ensuring inclusive governance, let's talk about this particular angle that you saw in the slide that we put up the other time, the need for persons with disabilities to also be included is something that a number of people have raised also as a concern. You know, the need for persons with disabilities in the ministerial nomination list is intended to raise awareness, create public discourse, and urge the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to consider nominating a person with a disability for ministerial position. The absence of any person with disability among the President's ministerial nominees is something considered disheartening, especially in the face of widespread advocacies for the inclusion of persons with disabilities in key decision-making positions. Well, the missed opportunity not only sends a dismaying message to the disability community, but also highlights the persisting barriers that hinder their full participation in the political landscape. Let's understand better what this is all about. This morning, we have two gentlemen joining us. Jacob Pele is CEO and founder of TAF Africa. He joins us along with Kole Shetima, who is country director, MacArthur Foundation. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning. Mr. Pele, let me begin with you. This is a campaign you've carried on for quite a while, and rightly so. But this new call for inclusive governance, particularly in the area of nominating persons with disabilities in the ministerial nomination list, exactly what do you think should be primary in the consideration?
Well, good morning and thank you for having me. It's important to underscore the need for inclusive governance and making sure that those who have been further left behind are brought to the forefront, not just to occupy position, but to serve and contribute to nation building. We have been left behind, and right now there's even the president's statement that is making rounds, let the poor breathe. But we have been held on our neck for too long that we are suffocating. And so bringing us to the table is not just for the sake of it, it's not just for paying lip service to inclusion, but also knowing fully well that we have something to contribute, and we do. We may have disability, but our minds are able. And so I think the time has come for the president to ensure that these 13 persons that are going to serve as the second batch of the list, that at least a person with disability must be in that list. He's done well so far with women, and most of them occupy two spaces. They are both women and young women. And so kudos to him. We are also waiting to give him a thumbs up by ensuring or seeing that he has included persons with disability in that list. So it's not a call just because we have disability. It's a call for service. It's a call for us to participate in nation building. It's a call to give us a sense of belonging. It's a call to make us know that we are part of the society and a citizen of Nigeria. And I'm not saying the president should just appoint a person with disability who is not qualified. There are many, countless qualified individuals that will occupy this position. Let me give you some statistics. You know, globally, out of 8 billion people, 1.3 billion are persons who have one form of disability or the other. And that's about 16% of the entire world population. In Nigeria, we are still running with the old data, which is still reasonable to be quoted, which is about 27 million, but I believe it's far more than that now. We should be nearing 35 million. That's a critical mass of people that is part of the government that shouldn't be neglected, you know. So let me say it unequivocally. Let us breathe, don't bridle on our neck. And we need to be part of what is happening in Aso Rock so that we can contribute to nation building and bring our expertise and knowledge to governance, and also set the example for other persons with disability to believe that they are part of this country.
First of all, what are your thoughts? Let me begin with you on that one, Mr. Shetima. What are your thoughts on the opinion that Mr. Pele just made now about considering, you know, persons with disabilities? The president already put that list out of ministerial nominees. Do you think there has been any representation? If there hasn't been any, why do you think that is the case?
Well, I definitely support the position of Jack on this issue because I think it's a question of peer representation, it's a question of justice, it's a question of inclusion. I think that all of us want a society whereby we are also reflected in whatever form of governance that we have in the country. And we don't want a country whereby either on the basis of ethnicity, whether on the basis of religion, whether in terms of gender or others, we are not well represented. As we all know, Nigeria as a country has a penal character policy. And that penal character policy is done in order to ensure that every state has a minister. So if, for example, 30% of, about more than 15% of our population is not represented in that kind of situation in our governance, whether at the national level or at the state level or whatever level, certainly that is not a fair representation. So we have a penal character because we want to have a fair representation of every part of the country. Then it also means when that basis is also, and it's based on states. And why are we doing that one? Because we want a country whereby every part of the state country is reflected. We have a national gender policy which said that 35% of our governance and positions should also reflect a gender representation. And we also have a national disability policy which said that at least 5% of the nominations and appointments should be from people with disability. So what we are advocating for and what we are supporting is just stick to what the policy says. No one is saying, come and create something new. No, we already have made those commitments. So the point is that it's about accountability. We have made a commitment in our national policy documents, and therefore, please implement what the government already have signed on to. I think we're all excited to see the increase in number of women so far, about 25%, which is good. And I think we're hoping that the next set of appointments will reflect the 35% that is we have already committed to as a country, as a people. And therefore, we are also hoping that that 5% that we have committed to ourselves to, I think should be there. Now, think about 30 million people, or 35 or 27. Now, if you think of countries in the West Africa region, whether in terms of Ghana, which is like 33 million people. So what we are now saying is that, can you really afford a situation whereby a country like Ghana, in the size of governance population, is not reflected and not represented in your own cabinet? And if you look at, there are even smaller countries like Benin, Togo, Gambia, in all those countries, which all of them, maybe about 5, 6 of them, when you put them together, that is when they will even make up the 30% of our population who are not going to be represented in our cabinet as a result of our policy that we don't. So our advocacy, our support is to say that we have made a commitment as a people, as a country. We want fairness, we want representation, we want justice. And that will be done when we try to implement, when we implement the policy that we are committed to, whether at the national level, whether at the state level, whether at the local government level. Those things I think that are necessary, and that's why I support the position of Jake and all the disability communities that are making this advocacy around disability, the campaign around ability to serve. Because disability does not necessarily mean that you cannot serve, because we know that people who do not have talents in certain ways, they may actually have talents in certain ways.
Okay.
And therefore, well, let's see how that, can we...
There are those who will wonder, okay, what are the potential, I mean, you've talked about their population, about 30 million, you said. What are the potential consequences of that exclusion? If, for instance, we don't have a minister, representing that community, what are the potential consequences?
Well, I think that for me, I think the consequence is one, injustice in our society, inequity in our society. I think that is critical and very important that we should not overlook. But the other important thing is that there are certain things that people with disability know, and they know how it pinches them, that those of us take it for granted. For example, we call meetings in many places, and we don't even think about, okay, do we have access to those buildings, or we have hotels? You go to a hotel, and then, those of us without disability will not even think about, okay, how can I actually be able to sleep in this bed? Or you go to the airport, people are struggling. You find people with disability who are struggling in order to board a plane. And those of us, I don't think about this as a problem at any time, but the people with disability think about those types. And I think also in terms of unemployment, if you look at the high level of employment, there's a lot of stigma in our society about disability. We think that these are people either some devil or some devilish things have happened to them, and therefore we stigmatize them and other things. But I think that, just imagine a minister or a governor or a commissioner who's a disabled person, the kind of inspiration, the kind of role model that will give to all those people who think that to be disabled means just get a ball on the street, go and beg people on the street and ask them to give you 1 naira, 2 naira, 3 naira and other things, or people who are just packed like sardines and then deported out of our major cities because we don't want to see them, we don't want to see our shame. It's our shame that we have allowed that situation to happen, but we don't want us to be seen that is our shame. So I think that if we can inspire all the young disabled persons in our country to show them that this is a person with a disability like you, who is now a minister, who is now a governor, who is now a commissioner, who is now a chair of a board of an organization. I think that is the most probably powerful
I'm glad you're disaggregating this, to the state level as well, because there are those who would wonder, is it just about the federal government? How about the states? But Mr. Pele, one of the things that Mr. Shettima has just mentioned now is the advantage of inclusive governance in the area of better policy making and comprehensive understanding of societal needs. Can you please share some specific areas or policy areas where, inclusion of persons with disabilities could have a positive, transformative impact, whether at the federal level or at the states level?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me look into this camera and look into the eyes of Mr. President and those around him and say to them, Mr. President, you made a statement that had become a powerful inspiration for anyone who have compassion in their heart. You said, let the poor breathe. Please live up to this statement. Live up to this statement. Let us say that at the end of the day, you said it and you meant it. What are the policy values that a person with disability who is sitting in the cabinet will bring or will do Do you know we've been struggling to implement just the Disability Act? Can you imagine where a sitting minister who is a person with disability is in the cabinet? He will better advise the president how to proceed. He will better advise the president how these things can be implemented. There's a saying that he who feels it knows it. You know, we know where the issues are. Now, there's one very important point I want to make and disabuse the minds of those who have this notion that, oh, don't worry, we're there for everybody. No, you're not there for everybody. You don't know what I go through. You don't know the fact that I'm sitting here away from your camera and all I see on your screen is shadows, you know. You don't know the fact that, you know, there are many of us that is not able to see the blackboard and will not be able to continue in their education. You don't know the fact that there are many of us who lives in abject poverty, who can't feed themselves nor their family. There are many of us that don't have access to quality education, access to quality health. If we put our own person there, we will hold that person accountable to tell the president how best and how desperate we want these policies to be implemented. So what will they do? Implementation of policies, driving to ensure that we get budgetary allocation, ensuring that we get employment, not on the basis of our disability, but on the basis of our qualification, you know, to ensure review of some of the policies and that have gaps, you know. Let me give you a very important information. For instance, we all fought for Electoral Act, but do you know also in the Electoral Act there's even a discriminatory word like incapacitated people, you know. So when we have our own person representing us, our voice will count.
Okay. Just
like our vote has counted and ensured that many of them today are elected. Please let our voice count. Okay. Don't suffocate us so that we cannot breathe.
Well, Mr. Shetima, still talking about that, you said earlier that inclusive governance, or was it Mr. Pele who said that inclusive governance goes beyond just representation? It also means creating policies that address the needs and rights of persons with disabilities. How, in your opinion, can we push for disability inclusive policies and programs at the highest level of government, as you said the other time, be it federal level or the states, all 36 of them?
Well, I think that the first one is really even the current national policy on disability that we have. We know that we have there's a 5 years grace period, which means that by January next year, that policy should have been in place. But I have not really seen any effort in order to ensure that policy is fully implemented. And I think that having a minister or a governor or a commissioner and others in that kind of place will help us. So if you look at the policy, there are a number of things. For example, access to buildings. You know, this is a basic thing. So imagine you have a minister who goes to the federal cabinet meeting, and a person has a physical disability and is not able to, or he or she is not able to get into the building. You can just imagine the kind of consciousness it's going to create in the minds of everyone in Aso Rock, because everyone will now begin to think that, oh, is that the experience of these people that we are going through until when we call to for meetings and other things? Or imagine going to an airport and then you see someone with disability trying to get on a plane and cannot get onto that plane. Now, you can just imagine the minister trying to go to Lagos from Abuja, but cannot get on the plane because there is no possibility. So that kind of consciousness that it will really create, are the things that have been provided for in our own national policy around education. For example, you can imagine people going into universities and other things. They don't have access to brailles. They cannot be easily admitted into universities. They don't have, somebody has to help them, of course, to get into the classroom. Somebody has to help them in order to read the document that they have to read and other things. So there are a number of policies. For me, the starting point is how do we even ensure that our National Disability Act that have been in place now for about 4.5 years, how do we ensure that once, do we ensure that now we begin the process of implementing those policies?
Okay.
And so that by next January next year, then it becomes an enforceable act. So that anybody who violates any of those things, either in terms of education, whether in terms of building, whether in terms of healthcare, whether in terms of employment, all those people will now be held accountable because that's what the Act says.
Okay.
So for me, the starting bedrock of everything is the national policy itself, and how do we ensure that that national policy is implemented and enforced as from January of next year.
Well, Mr. Pele, I think it was Mr. Shetima that raised the issue about the National Assembly the other time. So I'm just wondering how you think we can engage the National Assembly also in terms of this inclusive governance, particularly with a bias for persons with disabilities. How do you see that happening? The National Assembly made that law that you said you have referenced the other time. If those laws that are made by the National Assembly aren't being implemented, isn't that a waste of resources? So how do you think we can engage the National Assembly themselves to the point that they can say, okay, you know what, we see this gap, let's fill it?
Well, we are doing that in our own small way, but there's a lot more to be done. We recognize the entry point of getting the attention of these legislators. During the induction by the Legislative Institute, I was one of the speakers, and I focused on inclusion, getting them to understand legislative inclusion. The current Chief of Staff started a good work by ensuring and inaugurating the Committee for Persons with Disability. Every legislator needs to be aware of the dividends of democracy that they will bring when they pursue an inclusive agenda. So how do we do that? Number one is strategic engagement. We've written to the Senate President. Unfortunately, sometimes, they get inundated with all kinds of requests and letters, and they don't process some on time, but I believe that they will, So we've written to the Senate President. We want to at least have a sit down with him, not for optics sake, but to really discuss concrete issues.
Okay.
We've also written to the Speaker of the House. Hopefully, when we get a reply, we'll be able to sit down with them. But there's also something that we have proposed to them, which I believe if the Senate President is watching, please assent to those things and let's see how we can do it. We proposed to them to give them sign language interpreter at our own cost. We are not asking the National Assembly to pay them salary. We will pay them salary. We already have that in one of our projects. We want to ensure that the plenary is truly inclusive, because there are over 7 to 8 million Nigerians that are watching them, not hearing them, not knowing what they are saying. So let's begin by having that opportunity to introduce sign language. So
most certainly,
training them, giving them information.
Yeah. Well, my sincere apologies. We just ran out of time. I'm sorry I cut you, but you can quickly land on that point, and then before we let you go.
Okay, so let's make sure that we engage them, but also new committees have been formed. I would propose a twin-track approach where every committee has an element of disability inclusion. Every committee, and then a standalone committee for disability. The same thing should be applicable in the Senate committees. So we will continue to engage with all these committees and all the legislative arm. The Legislative Institute, my good friend, the DG, has opened his door. I'm going to speak in their conference on inclusion, West African Conference on Inclusion, so continuous engagement, making sure we implement, making sure we sustain the effort, and at the end of the day, by his grace, we will see a truly inclusive legislative assembly.
Okay. Thank you so much for that and several other information that you've given us this morning. Jacob Pele is co-founder and CEO of TAF Africa, as well as Kole Shetima, who is country director, MacArthur Foundation.